Hello, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to visit my channel just all in one resource. I thought it would be a decent idea to create a story for my American Truck Simulator series. If you wish to use my video and/or wish to have a written copy of my story, please send me an email. Now let's get to the story. This story will take place in 2024. As the rain beat down on the abandoned streets, the 5 survivors huddled together in a small alleyway, their eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. They had been on the run for weeks, constantly searching for a place to call home, a place where they could feel safe from the relentless onslaught of the undead. The group was made up of a diverse cast of characters, each with their own unique set of skills and personalities. There was Sarah, the tough-as-nails former soldier who had seen her fair share of combat. Then there was John, the quiet and reserved scientist who had spent his life studying viruses and disease. Next was Maria, the quick-witted and street-smart teenager who had survived on her own since the outbreak began. And finally, there were the 2 brothers, Carlos and Miguel, who had grown up on the rough streets of the city and knew how to handle themselves in a fight. As they sat in silence, their weapons at the ready, they suddenly heard a low growling noise coming from the end of the alleyway. They tensed up, ready for whatever might come their way. Suddenly, a pack of wolves burst into view, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The survivors scrambled to their feet, ready for battle. The wolves were fierce, but the survivors were even fiercer. They fought with all their might, using everything at their disposal to take down the pack. Sarah fired off round after round from her shotgun, while John used his knowledge of the animals to find their weak spots. Carlos and Miguel fought back to back, using their knives to fend off the wolves that got too close. And Maria used her agility to dodge and weave, striking at the wolves from every angle. After what felt like hours, the last wolf fell to the ground, its lifeless body twitching, then fell silent. The survivors were battered and bruised. As they caught their breath, they knew that they couldn't rest for long. They had to keep moving, keep searching for a safe haven. The group continued down the deserted street, their footsteps echoing through the eerie silence of the night. They had been scavenging for supplies for the past few hours, and the weight of their backpacks was starting to take a toll on their tired bodies. Suddenly, a growl shattered the quiet, followed by more from different directions. The group froze, realizing that they were surrounded by a pack of snarling, flesh-eating zombies. It was obvious they heard the fight taking place, and were drawn to the area. They quickly assessed their options, and their leader, a hardened survivor named Anna, made a split-second decision. She signaled for the group to run towards the nearest building, a hardware store on the corner of the street. As they sprinted towards the store, the zombies chased after them, their moans and growls growing louder and more menacing. The group made it to the door just in time, slamming it shut behind them and barricading it with whatever they could find. Their hearts pounding with adrenaline, they caught their breath and surveyed their surroundings. The store was dimly lit, and the air was thick with the scent of rust and metal. Shelves of tools and supplies lined the walls, and in the corner was a small office with a locked door. Anna took charge, instructing the others to search the store for anything useful, while she kept watch at the front door. As they worked, they could hear the zombies pounding and scratching at the barricade, trying to break through. Suddenly, the door to the office burst open, and a group of survivors stumbled out, frantically searching for a way out. They had been trapped in the office for days, surviving on canned food and bottled water. Anna and her group quickly welcomed the newcomers, and together they worked to fortify their barricade and prepare for the inevitable battle that awaited them. As the hours passed and the sun began to rise, the group braced themselves for the fight ahead, determined to survive another day. The group had been on the move for several days now, taking shelter in various buildings and fending off zombies and wolves alike. They were exhausted, both physically and mentally, but knew they had to keep going if they were going to survive. As they walked down the deserted street, the sound of rain pouring down mixed with the occasional clap of thunder. Lightning illuminated the sky, casting eerie shadows around them. Suddenly, they heard a faint sound in the distance. It sounded like a human voice, but they couldn't make out what was being said. "Did you guys hear that?" said Carlos, looking around nervously. The others nodded, gripping their weapons tightly. They slowly made their way towards the sound, keeping an eye out for any signs of danger. As they got closer, they could hear the voice more clearly. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded panicked. "Please, someone help me," she cried out. The group picked up the pace, following the sound to a nearby alley. There, they saw a woman flanked by 2 zombies. Without hesitation, they charged towards them, weapons at the ready. The fight was intense, and several of the group members were injured, but they managed to finally kill them and rescue the woman. They gently helped the woman to her feet, reassuring her that the zombies have been taken care of. "Thank you so much," the woman said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was going to die." They gave her a drink of water and asked her to make her way to a pharmacy just around the corner. She nodded and left to go toward the store. The group members exchanged a look, knowing that in this world, death was always a possibility. As they approached the next house on their list, they noticed something strange. There were no zombies in sight, but the house was oddly silent. They cautiously approached, guns at the ready. The door was unlocked, and they slowly pushed it open, ready for anything. Inside, they found the house completely empty, with no sign of any struggle. But there was a strange feeling in the air, a feeling of unease that sent shivers down their spines. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from upstairs. They quickly made their way up, guns raised. As they approached a closed door, they could hear something moving on the other side. They pushed the door open, and to their surprise, found a woman sitting on the floor, holding a small child. The woman looked up at him, fear in her eyes. "Please don't hurt us," she pleaded. "We've been hiding here for days, ever since the zombies attacked our town. We thought we were safe here, but then the wolves came." She went on to explain that a pack of wolves had been circling the house for hours, waiting for their chance to attack. The woman and her child had been trapped, unable to leave or defend themselves. The group immediately sprang into action, barricading the doors and windows and setting up traps to keep the wolves at bay. They worked through the night, barely sleeping, constantly on guard. But despite their efforts, the wolves were relentless. They attacked again and again, testing the group's defenses. The survivors were forced to fight for their lives, using everything they had at their disposal to keep the wolves at bay. As dawn broke, the group emerged from the house, battered and bruised, but alive. They had survived another night, and as they gathered their gear, they set off down the road, scanning their surroundings for any signs of a threat. They finally took their gear and began walking away from the house. They soon came to an area of woods which had an overgrown path which was still visible. They kept alert as they followed the path. There were no sounds to be heard, no birds, no animals of any kind. It was an eerie feeling. It's as if the wildlife knew that if they made a sound, they themselves could become a victim. The survivors had been on the move for days, scavenging for food and shelter wherever they could find it. The relentless rain had not let up, making their travels even more difficult. They were exhausted, hungry, and wet to the bone. As they walked through the woods, they heard a howling sound in the distance. They knew it was a wolf, and it sounded like it was in distress. As they got closer, they come upon a small clearing surrounded by woods with a low-lying mist which hugged the ground, and immediately saw a pack of wolves fighting off a horde of zombies. The wolves were fierce and agile, jumping and biting at the zombies with deadly accuracy. The zombies were slow and clumsy, but their sheer numbers made him a formidable opponent. The survivors watched in awe as the wolves continued to fight off the zombies, never giving up even as some of their pack fell to the undead. One of the survivors, a man named John, stepped forward and aimed his shotgun at the zombies, firing round after round into the horde. The noise attracted even more zombies, and soon the survivors found themselves surrounded. They fought hard, using whatever weapons they had, but it was clear they were outnumbered. They were forced to retreat, running as fast as they could through the rain-soaked woods. As they ran, they could hear the howls of the wolves in the distance, still fighting off the zombies. It was a reminder that even in the midst of a zombie apocalypse, there were still things worth fighting for, and allies could be found in unexpected places. The group of survivors stumbled upon an old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. The night was dark and eerie. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional howl of wolves in the distance. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning illuminated the farmhouse, casting long shadows on the ground. As they approached the farmhouse, they noticed a black 1930s automobile parked outside. It was in ruins and decayed, a reminder of a time long gone. The survivors cautiously approached the house and pushed open the creaky old door. Inside, the air was musty and stale. Cobwebs clung to every corner, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. The group began to explore the old farmhouse, searching for any useful supplies they could find. They discovered a few rusty tools, and some old rusted cans of food. One of the survivors noticed a strange marking on the wall, a symbol that they didn't recognize. They tried to brush it off, but something about it made them uneasy. As they continued to explore the farmhouse, they stumbled upon a basement door. It was old and heavy, and it creaked loudly as they pushed it open. The basement was dark, and the smell of mold and decay filled their nostrils. They slowly descended the creaky old staircase, their flashlights illuminating the way. As they reached the bottom, they noticed a cage full of animal bones, and off in the corner a small wooden door. As they got closer to the door, they could hear a scratching sound as if someone or something was desperately scratching to get out. They slowly pushed the small door open. They saw a small box, and on it a small lit candle. On the box was a small open chest. As they examined it further, they saw a small rusted key. Anna took the key, and as she did, the candle flame flickered. The survivors immediately felt a chill go through them, but they paid little attention and stepped back into the basement. As they examined the basement further, they saw which looked like large metal door, padlocked shut. Anna tried the key, and as she did, the lock gave way. Anna slowly pushed the door open to reveal a long corridor which opened to a small alcove. The group silently walked down the corridor to reveal a child-sized casket on a stone pedestal. On further examination, they noticed chains loosely wrapped around it. Apparently, someone was trying to keep something inside from getting out. Maria whispered that they should leave, but John wanted to know what was inside the casket. Maria grabbed John by the wrist and motioned that they would do this together. As they pushed the lid, the sound of screeching metal against metal filled the room. As John pointed his flashlight into the casket, he noticed something moving, but couldn't figure out exactly what. Anna pulled John back, cautioning him to not do this. Something was really bad here, and they should just leave, and tend to fortifying the old house, but Maria wanted to know exactly what was inside the casket, just as John did. As Maria got closer, a small rotted, disfigured hand slowly showed itself creeping out of the lid. The survivors all jumped back, shocked and horrified with what they were witnessing. Suddenly, the hand started to writhe as if it was in pain, and as the hand movements became more frantic, what was inside let out an unholy scream. John cocked his shotgun and pushed the barrel into the casket and pulled the trigger. The sound of the shotgun was so loud in the small room caused everyone to cover their ears in pain. Suddenly, the unholy screams stopped, and the small hand fell back inside slowly, and everything fell silent. As the group composed themselves, they quickly left the room, and down the hallway back to the basement, and went upstairs. As the night wore on, the group huddled in the farmhouse, listening to the sound of the rain and the distant growls of the wolves. They knew that they needed to fortify the farmhouse if they were going to survive the night. They set to work, barricading the doors and windows, creating traps and fortifications. As the survivors settled down for the night, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The strange marking on the wall and the locked metal door in the basement haunted their thoughts. What secrets lay hidden in this old farmhouse, and what horrors awaited them in the darkness? The survivors split up to explore the farmhouse, each carrying a flashlight and a weapon. The creaking floorboards and the howling wind outside created an eerie atmosphere. They entered each room cautiously, searching for supplies and anything that could be useful. As they were searching the bedrooms, they heard whispers coming from down the hallway. They turned off their flashlights and listened carefully. They could hear shuffling and the sound of something dragging on the floor. They whispered to each other, trying to figure out what to do next. Suddenly, they heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen downstairs. They quickly made their way down the hallway and found the kitchen in disarray. Cabinets were open and their contents were spilled all over the floor. They could hear something moving around in the darkness. One of the survivors pointed their flashlight towards the noise, revealing a dark figure standing in the shadows. They couldn't make out any details, but it seemed to be staring directly at them. The figure began to shuffle towards them, and they could hear more shuffling coming from behind it. The survivors quickly backed away, realizing that they were surrounded. They raised their weapons, ready to defend themselves. The figure in front of them suddenly lunged forward, revealing itself to be a zombie. The survivors engaged in a fierce battle, fighting off the zombie and the others that emerged from the darkness. After the battle, the survivors regrouped and continued to search the farmhouse, finding more supplies and weapons. They began to work on securing the doors and windows, placing traps and barricades to keep out the zombies and the wolves. As they worked, they noticed the black 1930s automobile parked outside, covered in rust and decay. They wondered who could have left it there and what had happened to them. The storm outside continued to rage on, adding to the tension and fear that hung in the air. As the survivors continued to search the rooms for supplies, the whispers from the shadows grew louder. They couldn't quite make out what was being said, but the voices sounded angry and desperate. The sound of the rain intensified, pounding against the windows and roof like an angry fist. The survivors were on edge, jumping at every sound and movement. Each flash of lightning illuminated the rooms they visited, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The thunder rumbled like an angry beast, making the farmhouse shake. Suddenly, a bright bolt of lightning lit up the sky. In the distance, on a small hill, they could see the silhouettes of shambling zombies, moving closer with each passing moment. The survivors knew that they had to act fast if they were going to survive. They started to secure the farmhouse, boarding up windows and doors, setting traps and laying out weapons. They also worked on creating a makeshift barricade out of whatever materials they could find. As they worked, they continued to hear the whispers and shuffling sounds coming from the shadows. It was clear that they were not alone in the farmhouse. The survivors tried to stay quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. The sound of the rain and thunder continued to build, adding to the sense of unease. It was as if the storm was a living thing, moving and breathing around them. As the night wore on, the survivors huddled together in the farmhouse, listening to the storm rage outside. They knew that the zombies were getting closer, and that they would have to fight for their lives. But for now, All they could do was wait and hope that the makeshift barricade would hold. The zombies outside grew louder, scratching and banging against the walls. The survivors could hear their moans and growls, and they knew they needed to finish their preparations quickly. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from one of the windows. A zombie had broken through and was now inside the farmhouse. The survivors frantically searched for anything they could use as a weapon, grabbing whatever was within reach. The zombie was slow and clumsy, and the survivors were able to overpower it. But they knew there would be more to come. They continued to work, securing the farmhouse as best they could. As they worked, they could hear the wolves howling in the distance, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The rain continued to pour down, making it difficult to hear anything beyond the farmhouse walls. The survivors were on edge, knowing that they could be attacked at any moment. But they also knew that they had to keep going, that they had to keep fighting to stay alive. As the group began making sure no other zombies were left inside any of the remaining rooms, suddenly they heard Maria screaming from downstairs. The survivors gasped in horror as they watched Maria being pulled toward the floor. Maria was fighting furiously and yelling obscenities which finally broke the rest of the group out of their shock. They acted fast and grabbed Maria by her legs, pulling with all of their strength, and after a few moments were able to finally free her. Maria, shocked and angered, quickly fell against a wall sobbing. As Anna and Sarah were trying to calm Maria down, the rest of the group turned and noticed the dark, misshapen hands slowly creep back into the floor. A large flash of lightning hit the house, jolted everyone back to their senses. As another flash of lightning lit up the sky, it revealed ghastly figures of several zombie-like creatures clawing their way out from an old graveyard. Soon they were on their feet, and the team soon noticed that they were not walking like any of the zombies they have seen. Their movements were jerky, as if they traveled several steps with each step they took. It didn't look at all natural, but then again nothing at the farmhouse was natural. John yelled, "They're coming!" The survivors quickly sprang into action, pressing their backs against one another, making a circle of protection. It seemed the fight went on for hours. Each member fought with every bit of strength they had, firing their weapons which ripped through the zombies, making their bodies contort and explode in all directions. When the battle finally ended, they decided to dump the dead bodies onto the lawn. They remained outside to let the rain wash what it could from their clothes before heading back inside. They all slumped onto the floor out of exhaustion and lit a candle and quietly ate what little food they had. In the chaos, they realized that the farmhouse was not just a safe haven, but also a prison. They were trapped with no way out. Despite their fear and desperation, the survivors refused to give up. They fortified the doors and windows, set up traps and alarms. They went back to repairing the traps they made earlier, and even managed to restore some of the old machinery and tools that had been left behind. As the night wore on, the survivors learned to adapt to their new reality. They formed a tight-knit community, relying on each other for support and protection. They continued to face challenges and dangers, but they never lost hope. After the work, they sat around the small candle they lit earlier and told stories they heard when they were children. Some scary, some just funny to hear, which helped lighten the mood of what they have gone through over the last several weeks. They also spoke about what caused the zombie outbreak to occur. At the time, rumors were spreading how it wasn't a virus which caused this to happen, but it was the cure which mutated the virus itself. As people were taking the cure, people suddenly fell asleep and never woke up, only to die a few days later and coming back to life. At first, there were news reports that people were being killed, but no one knew by what or by whom. As the dead were being prepared in local mortuaries and embalmed, they would suddenly sit up and attack the person who were preparing them for burial. Anna spoke up, asking that no more talk about how this started. What is important is that they stay alive. And as the storm finally began to subside, the The survivors looked out into the darkness and wondered what other horrors lay ahead in this new world. As the storm suddenly ceased, the survivors found themselves in an eerie silence. The only sounds were the creaking of the old farmhouse and the whispers coming from the third floor. Curiosity overtook the survivors, and they made their way up the stairs, cautiously checking every room they passed. As they reached the top, they found an old woman hunched over with a cane, muttering to herself in a ghostly voice. Suddenly, the woman screeched and backed into the wall, causing a small fire to start. The survivors quickly extinguished the flames, but not before the room was damaged. Confused and scared, the survivors tried to understand what had just happened. It was then that they found an old journal belonging to two ghost hunters who had investigated the farmhouse back in the 1930s. The journal described the same ghostly woman the survivors had encountered. When they reached the downstairs living room, they again sat around the candle. Miguel started to tell a story he heard about two ghost hunters who were asked to come to a farmhouse to investigate a haunting, but was said to have left the farmhouse with their lives. But that would not explain finding their journal here, since it was said they never returned to the farmhouse. Miguel continued on saying how these ghost hunters experienced much of what they experienced. They all sat quietly as Miguel finished his story. And they suddenly realized they were in the very same house those two hunters came to investigate, and understood they were not only having to fight against zombies, they also were trapped in the house, which obviously took the lives of those two ghost hunters. They knew that they needed to come up with a plan if they wanted to survive. As they discussed their next steps, they heard howls, then teeth snapping together, which turned into growling just outside of the front door. As the team slowly walked to one of the windows, that these were no longer wolves. It appeared these wolves had been turned into misshapen shapes. Just images of what they used to be, but changed into grotesque figures. Some of these creatures were standing on their back legs, howling toward the night sky, then lowering their gaze to look at the survivors. As they did, the survivors could see black ooze dripping from their jaws, filled with jagged, rotted teeth. The survivors backed away from the window. Clearly shaken, they stood there for a short time, not knowing what to do. It was one thing to fight zombies, but to have to fight mutated wolves and ghosts, they all agreed with silent looks that this could be way above what any human being can handle. But they also come to the realization they had no choice, which gave them strength in knowing no matter what happens, they will fight to the death if necessary, since they have no other choice but to fight or become like them. The survivors huddled together downstairs, their faces grim and serious as they discussed their situation. They all knew deep down that they couldn't stay in the farmhouse any longer. It was just too dangerous, too haunted, and too vulnerable to attacks from zombies and wolves. Suddenly, Sarah spoke up. "I have an idea," she said. "We could try to make a run for it, but we'd never make it through the zombies and wolves. But what if we try to lure them away from the farmhouse?" The others looked at her skeptically, but he continued. "We could create a diversion, make some noise or something, and draw them away from here. Then we could sneak out the back and head for the hills." The group discussed the idea for a few moments, weighing the risks and rewards. In the end, they decided it was worth a try. They gathered up what supplies they could carry and made their way quietly up to the top floor. Once there, they began making noise, banging on walls and doors, yelling and screaming. The zombies and mutated wolves outside heard the commotion and began to move towards the sound. The survivors quickly slipped out the back door and ran for the hills, using their knowledge of the area and their wits to evade the undead and the animals that were now in hot pursuit. As they ran, the storm continued to rage around them, the thunder and lightning lighting up the night sky. As Maria made her way to the top of a small hill, she turned to see Miguel helping Carlos while he was being torn to pieces by one of the mutated wolves. Carlos was screaming in agony and terror. Miguel was shooting his weapon, which tore away the flesh of one of the wolves which was gripping Carlos' throat. The shots appeared to not stop the wolf. Then suddenly Carlos fell silent as the wolf tore away his throat. As Miguel was about to run, another mutated wolf and a zombie attacked him. As they dropped Miguel to his knees, he stabbed repeatedly each of his attackers until another mutated wolf opened its jaws from behind and clamped down on Miguel's head, which ended in a spray of flesh and blood. The rest of the survivors began to run, but a horde of zombies caught up and surrounded them. Anna, Sarah, and John decided to stand back to back and got ready for the fight of their lives. As Maria stood locked in place, unable to move because of what she was witnessing. She couldn't turn her eyes away from what was happening. Maria watched as John unloaded his shotgun into the heads of numerous zombies as Sarah was burying her axe into anything that moved. John soon ran out of ammunition and changed over to his axe. Anna was firing her handgun, which made her targets' heads explode into a shower of blood and gore. Anna, Sarah, and John were screaming obscenities as they lunged forward with each attack. Maria noticed that they were being bitten, and pieces of their flesh were being torn from their bodies while they fought hand to hand. Maria could no longer stay to watch, and quickly ran toward the trees. As she was running away, Maria could still hear Anna, Sarah, and John cursing, then she couldn't hear them screaming any longer. As the days wore on, Maria, almost dead from hunger and lack of water, saw in the distance in the woods the light of a fire. She cautiously walked to the camp and stayed just out of the light. As she approached closer, she noticed 3 people. 2 were sitting preparing something. It looked like they were eagerly waiting for the food to cook, while one person was turning a handle which made the meat turn so it wouldn't burn. The smell of the cooking food got the better of her, and she walked into the light of the fire. As she did, all 3 stopped what they were doing and looked in her direction. Maria looked at each person and noticed that one person had jagged teeth and looked like he didn't wash in years. The second man next to him has scars on his face, which looked like bite marks. The third, who was turning the handle, looked like she was about 12 years old. Her hair was a mess, every hair going every which way. Maria then noticed a torso of a man lying beside the fire. The head was missing, and it looked like it had muscle missing from its chest. Suddenly, one of the men smiled a smile which sent shivers down Maria's back, and said to the man sitting next to him, "It seems we have our next meal," and they suddenly rushed at Maria with a speed you wouldn't expect. Maria dodged the first man's attack easily, and sunk her knife into the back of the man's neck, which spurted blood. The man fell as Maria lunged forward with her second knife, which caught the second man in one of his eyes, and Maria pushed her hand against the hilt of her blade and drove the knife home deep into the man's brain, which sent him slumping on top of the campfire, which forced sparks into the night air. The young girl suddenly realized that she was next and ran into the darkness. Days and weeks passed as Maria finally found a settlement. As she approached the settlement, she noticed it had gates as high as 30 feet, and the camp was made of logs with pointed ends to stop people from climbing over. As she got closer, she was told to stop by men with raised rifles. After a few minutes, Maria couldn't stand any longer from hunger. She then collapsed in a heap. Days later, she awoke in a bed with clean sheets, and a kind old lady approached with a loving smile. Maria fell quietly back to sleep. Weeks later, Maria could be seen walking through the streets of the settlement, and one evening she told the story of what she had endured, and of the bravery of her friends Anna, Sarah, John, Carlos, and Miguel. The settlement built a memorial to honor Maria's fallen friends. As the memory of her ordeal began to fade, she got married to a wonderful man and had 2 boys. What happened next is for another story. I really appreciate the time you spend listening to the story. Take care and stay safe.